Hello and welcome to the second week of Musical Warp Drive. We're going to be looking into melody this week from all angles, covering scales, modes, how they relate to chords, contour, and how to craft a good melody, playing arpeggios and chord tones, chromatic notes, all sorts of stuff. Melody is like really the one of the most important, if not the most important parts of music. And so it's important that we spend some time on it and really get a grip on what's going on with melodies in general. So it's time we dive in. Melody is the essence of music. Mozart. Overview and purpose. What is a melody? Well, a melody is just a linear succession or sequence of notes, meaning if I've got a note, F, if I have a bunch of notes that come after it in time, that's a melody, one at a time. As opposed to a chord, which is a bunch of notes played simultaneously. If we played those notes independently, we have a kind of melody, one note after another, a linear succession or sequence of notes. This is also known as a line or a tune. These are just synonyms for melody, meaning someone might say, "Can you play me that lead line?" Or what's the tune to that song? They're talking about a melody, of course. So where do melodies appear? Everywhere. Music is essentially made of melodies. Both in the sense that the melody is really the main component of a song. It's the most readily accessible element to a listener. And also that every part of music is essentially melodies, meaning even chords are just multiple melodies playing simultaneously in a certain sense. This will become very clear as we get into the harmony weeks and start dealing with chords in a very granular way, looking at each one of their notes independently instead of thinking of them as a unit. Everything in music is really just melodies. So an example would be a lead line. When someone says a lead line, they simply mean the melody. That's like the actual melody. Like you've got a chord, and then you've got, that's your lead line or your lead melody. Bass lines are just melodies. They're just very low melodies. The top line of a chord progression, meaning if I've got a set of chords here, maybe like, we can hear a little melody there. Right? The top note of every chord is going to create a melody in our mind as the chord progression flows by. The inner lines within progressions, if we looked at the inner notes to these chords, they too would form little melodies. That's one of the middle notes in these chords here. Right? That's what I mean, that chords are basically multiple melodies sounding simultaneously. And then drum patterns too are a type of melody. We don't think of that normally that way because they don't have pitches, but really they are. They're a succession of notes, high, low, in between, toms, snares, hi-hats, kick drums. They create kinds of melodies that we can latch onto and hear repeating in our mind, a kind of contour that goes up and down. So what is the role of melody in music? It's the focal point. It's that which stands out above all else, the most obvious and magnetizing element. For a listener, melody is everything, and we're all listeners. Music is about listening, and melody is that which your ear is going to be magnetized to instantaneously, above all else, before chords, before bass lines, before drum patterns. If there is a melody playing, that's what you're going to hear, especially if it's a non-musician listening. They're not going to be listening for chords or bass lines or drums or anything else most of the time. They're just listening for melodies. That's what music is really all about. Everything else is in support of the melody. So a melody is similar to the lead character in a movie or play. you're not watching the movie for the scenery, for the most part, or for the secondary characters. You're watching it for the lead character, for the narrative that unfolds with the lead character. It's the lead character that carries the story forward, that gets into trouble, that gets out of it, that saves the day, that does whatever. It's the lead character that 99% of people are interested in when they're watching a movie, unless you're in the movie business, just like we're in the music business, so to speak, and we're watching out for other elements. Nobody else is, for the most part. They're interested in the melody, and really so are we. Melody is what we sing when we remember a song. It's what we hum. It's what gets stuck in our head. Melody is just so important. It's the focal point. It's the most human element in a certain sense because it's reminiscent of speech. When we hear these chords, yeah, they feel nice, and there's an emotion associated with them, no doubt about it. But they don't particularly sound like somebody speaking, but when you hear something about that, because it's a succession of notes, just like a succession of words with pitch, feels like speech. And so there's a very human connection that goes on with melody. It's capable of immense subtlety using pitch, rhythm, timbre, articulation, dynamics, etc. Meaning there are so many dimensions or variables in a melody. A change in pitch, a change in rhythm, a change in timbre, which I can't get with the piano, of course. You change the instruments. You change the articulation. Do you hit the note right on? Or do you slide into it? If you're on another instrument, you can really slide. Do you fade in? We can't fade in with a piano, but you can on certain instruments. Do you hit it straight on? All sorts of things you can do that is just like speech. In speech, we have all these parameters as well. We have a kind of pitch that goes up and down, as you can hear with my voice right now. We have a rhythm. I'm not speaking with every word to be the same. That would be like rapping, right? Where every word is placed with the same rhythm. But we have a variable rhythm, the timbre of our voice, the articulation, how we say our words, our dynamics. Are we quiet? Are we soft? Are we loud? How does it move over time? All this is available in melody as well. So for me, melody is the most human element, the most connective element, instantaneously with all types of listeners. So what makes a good melody then? Well, that's a good question. There are no hard and fast rules here, only guidelines and ideas. For as many ideas as I can put forward for what a good melody is, you can probably find 10 melodies that don't do that are good melodies. However, it's good to be aware of these ideas because they can serve as a guide when you're stuck, and they can serve as inspiration when you're beginning to write. Because a lot of the time, great melodies do use these things, or maybe not even use them explicitly, but we can find that they actually fit into these categories, and that might be why we like them so much. So I'm going to do some demonstrations inside Studio One with some chords and melodies here in a second as we go over these. So some important features. It can be good for your melody to be singable. Reflect on the melodies that you love. Can you sing them or no? Let's take a look at what I mean. I'm going to go into Studio One now. So here I have written some chords on the piano, and then I've played a melody. I've got a whole bunch of them here we're going to go through. So melody number 1, I've labeled singable. This is a melody that's nice. It can be sung. So you could hum it to yourself later on if it got stuck in your head or whatever. I'm just going to play through the chords first, just so you can get a feel of the harmonic atmosphere I'm dealing with here. And then I'll play the melody. So you can see the chords I've chosen are quite traditional in a certain sense. They're essentially all triads except for the A minor 7 here. And very simple voicings, very pretty. very easy to listen to. And so the melody that came out when I did this was also in alignment with that. Very, in a certain sense, traditional, straightforward, pretty, but it's very singable melody, right? It's quite dynamic and it would feel good to sing. If we take a look at it, just zoom out a little bit here. Again, if you're not used to looking at this view, it's good that you do. So for instance, here's a D, right? This is where I start. Here's D coming up to B. This is E coming up to C. We can look at the black and gray lines here to see the keyboard. 2 black, 3 black, 2 black, 3 black. So I read this like I read music. I can see all the notes as it goes along. So I'll play this once more, and you can see the melody notes as it goes. And I'll also show some of the modulation I have going here. The modulation, in this case, this little line, is showing the breath strength, in a certain, you could say, of the clarinet as it flows along, the dynamics of the clarinet, which I've programmed into it. So going back to our presentation here, we can think about leaps versus steps. Leaps or steps are when you have, say you have a C. Let me switch back to my piano. If you have C and you go up by step, would mean to the next possible note in the scale, or down by step. So a stepwise melody would be a melody that only moves by steps. Whereas a leap is when you move anything more than one step. So a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and so on. So in general, steps are easy to sing, leaps are hard to sing. Just think about it. Versus, which one's easier to sing, right? So that's a feature that plays into being singable. How many steps and how many leaps? Good melodies usually have a good blend of steps and leaps, but it could be lots of leaps or it could be lots of steps. It really just depends. But generally speaking, a blend of the two makes for the most interesting contour. So interesting contour. Contour is the shape of a melody over time. If we go back and look at our melody here, we can actually see visually a shape, like over time. Here's the beginning and here's the end, right? It leaps up, leaps back down, leaps up again by step. It creates a kind of shape that looks like this, if you follow my mouse, right? It's creating a contour of sorts, like looking at a horizon, like mountains on the horizon, a silhouette. You see a kind of contoured shape. So this is what we mean by contour, and good melodies usually have interesting contours. I mean, a boring contour would simply be just a whole bunch of, there's no contour here. Yeah, there's rhythm and there is a pitch, but there's no up and down movement. There's no shape being created. So interesting contour is a way to think as well. And then within this, we can think about the range that a melody covers. Meaning, if we go back and look at our melody, the lowest note here is D, and the highest note is the G in the octave above. So I'm basically an octave and a half. This range, an octave and a half, is honestly like the most common range for a melody to encompass, maximally that is. A lot of melodies are actually less than that, sometimes less than an octave. But anything that starts to get more than an octave and a half, into 2 octaves or even 3, loses a singable quality because most people can't sing a range that large, at least easily. And it kind of maybe can break away from a coherency of a melody because there's too much variation. It's hard to keep track of the contour, so to speak, subconsciously as it occurs for a listener. So that's just something to think about. You could write a melody that encompasses 4 octaves and it could sound amazing, no doubt about it. I'm sure that it exists everywhere. But this is a general guideline. Octave and a half is usually the realm that good melodies work within. Then the idea of a climax, meaning if we look at this melodic shape, we see that this G note only occurs once. That's the climax of the melody, the highest point. We kind of ascend to it and descend to it. That doesn't mean that all melodies need to ascend and descend, but usually there is a climax in a melody, like a top note, which we've risen to and then we fall from. It could be at the beginning, it could be at the end, it doesn't have to be in the middle, it just so happens to be in this one, right in the middle. But that's an interesting idea to take note of too when you're examining melodies. Is there a climax in the melody? Is there a top note that it reaches and then doesn't surpass, right? And then another thing is outlining chord changes. Actually, before I get into this, I want to just reflect on this a little bit more. So here we've got this singable melody. Now, as I mentioned, leaps are hard to sing. If you tried to sing this, that's quite a large jump. Those are both sixth intervals. It's definitely singable, no doubt, and it's quite pretty. But it may be that I want it to be even more singable or easily singable. So what we could do is make the intervals smaller. So here's a version of the same melody, very slightly changed, to have just small intervals now, except for the very last one. So let's listen to that. So now we only have one large jump, one large leap. It's not even that large, a sixth at the end, but the rest we've shortened. We've made smaller the distances, smaller intervals between it, just for ease of singing, right? This is a consideration when people are writing for singers, is how easy is the melody to sing? That's an important factor, just like it is an important factor writing for a guitar, writing for piano, or for violin or anything. We can't write things that are too difficult for the player to play, so sometimes we have to write within restraints. And this is an example of taking something and then kind of restraining it back a little bit to make it a bit easier to sing. Not that that's necessary, but it might be in a certain situation. So that's an example of that. Now over here we have a melody that is hard to sing. It's still nice, but you'll see what I mean. It's hard to sing. Right, so it sounds nice, but could you sing these notes? Some people could, but it's quite difficult. I cannot do it. I'm not even going to try. Then there's constant leaps here, constant big leaps. Here there's gigantic leaps moving all the time. Here's a massive one octave jump. So this is a very difficult melody to sing. That doesn't mean it's a bad melody, but it's an example of a melody that's hard to sing. Instruments could play this, and it could be very pretty to listen to, and maybe that's what you want for a certain song. But it's a consideration to keep in mind. Now, I've got another melody here I'm calling Bad, Bad Overall. This is my attempt to just write a bad melody in general. So let's take a listen. Are there worse melodies? Yes. It's not the worst melody I've ever heard in my life, but it's not my idea of a great melody. The same notes get repeated over and over and over again. The rhythm is very repetitious, very static and even. The balance of note choices and when they occur in the bar structure here is very strange, feels weird to me. I don't particularly want to sing it. I don't really enjoy listening to it. You might love it. I don't know. So I apologize if you love that melody. But that's an example for me of something that is defying my inner guidelines as to what I consider personally to be a nice melody compared to, let's say, the first one. So let's compare the two. Here's this one once more. And this brings us to our next point, which is outlining chord changes. So this is something we're going to learn a lot about in the future, but I just want to touch on it briefly here. Often, really great melodies will outline chord changes, meaning they will play important notes within the chords that are sounding underneath them, so much so that you can hear the chords changing in the melody when the chords are not even playing. So that's the case with this one to a certain degree. So we're going to hear just the melody now, and we'll be able to still hear chords moving within you subtly. So can you still feel the chords? Now, this one here, the hard to sing one, actually even better outlines the chords, because a lot of these leaps that are being played are actually the chords broken apart, meaning it's playing arpeggios. So let's listen to that. So here we can really hear chords changing, because all the notes, especially here, these are just outlining chords directly. I'm just playing chord tones, right? I'm playing little arpeggios of the chords, which allows us to hear them as they go by. Now, if we listen to the bad melody, as I call it, and with no chords, we'll see that we can't track any chord changes because the notes don't outline the chord changes to any significant degree. So to a very small extent, we can hear some kind of motion, a feeling, some sort of feeling changes within us that must be some chords changing. But most likely, this comes from, we've heard the chord progression now, 10 times or whatever. If we just heard this on its own, it wouldn't really sound like anything particularly interesting. We wouldn't hear any chords changing, where these other ones, just the melody alone is enough to create the sensation of chords within us, even though no chords are sounding. So there are many other aspects of good melody writing that we will cover along the way. I can't cover everything in this introductory video, nor should I. A lot of it is context dependent. So as with everything in music, every rule, guideline, suggestion should be digested and then forgotten or broken, meaning we're going to do exercises where we work on this stuff, but then once we've really internalized these ideas, when it comes time to actually write music, we just forget them. I mean, for the most part, not as a bad thing, as a good thing. I don't think about my melodic rules, so to speak, as I'm writing, but they're in me, so it just comes out. The nice contour and following chord changes and all this kind of stuff, I'm not really thinking about it as I'm writing it. It just happens when I do it because I've thought about it in the past. I've examined and analyzed other melodies. I've written melodies specifically to try certain things, and that work has ingrained within me an inner sense of rightness, so to speak, of balance within me. And so when I write, it feels like those things just come naturally without me even having to remember them. So a lot of the time with theory, this is how it goes. We want to really study diligently and understand theory and composition, but then when it comes to actually do the thing, make the music, it's best if those rules and guidelines are not there to get in the way, and we can be more free, yet the rules and guidelines appear in our playing anyway because we've spent the time on them. So writing melodies. The most important thing is listening, obviously, just like with everything. Listening. Be attentive to melodies that feel good to you. Listen to the music that you love and be aware of what the melodies are like, what their contour is like. Think about the things that we've talked about so far and see, do those melodies you love encapsulate these ideas or not? Listen to melodies consciously instead of in the background. Really, with that practice of taking time to listen to music consciously, eyes closed or however you want to do that, and just be very attentive to the melody. And remove lyrics from the equation. Lyrics are wonderful. I have nothing against lyrics, honestly, but in this case, we're talking about notes. We're talking about melodies built of notes. And of course, all lyrical melodies are built of notes too. So sometimes it's important to remove the lyrics from the equation and just hear the melody or play the melody itself instead of hear it with lyrics. Singing is so important to writing melodies. We want to sing as much as we can. Singing good melodies will help you internalize their qualities. When you do find melodies you love, sing to them. Put the song on that you love and just sing with it. This singing will somehow physicalize in a certain way the melody within you. It will be there within you. When it comes time to write, those melodies that you've sung in the past, their qualities now that you love will be within you because you've felt them. You've moved your body in a certain way that has represented them or replicated them, and now when it comes time to write, they come naturally. That's been my experience. Once internalized, you will write good melodies as a matter of course. So learn principles and then forget them, just like I've said before. So order of operations. The order in which you write the various elements of your song can drastically alter the kinds of melodies you write. For example, come back here again. So these melodies that we've been hearing, I wrote the chords first. I wrote the harmonic progression, this one here, G, C over G, B minor, E minor, C, G over B, A minor 7, D, so on. If you don't understand these names right now, it doesn't matter. We will get to it in the next week. But for now, it's important to know that I wrote the chords first. Then as the chords were playing, I began writing my melodies on top. So that was a certain order of operations, beginning harmony first, melody second. Now here, I wrote melody first. So I cleared myself of the previous harmony to a certain extent. However, I wasn't able to fully do it because I was doing it in the same session, so to speak. I sat down and wrote these, then I took a break for a bit and I sat down to write this melody. So probably there is some similarities. I'm in the same key, I'm using the same instruments too, but in this case I wrote the melody first and I wrote the chords afterwards. So let's listen to that now. So the melody by itself now. So that's what I wrote with no sensation of harmony at all. I mean, yeah, I had an inner sensation of what the harmonies might be, but I wasn't listening to any chords as I wrote it. I just wrote it freehand, so to speak. Then I took that melody and I composed some harmonies, some chords to go along with it. So this is something we're going to do in depth in the harmony weeks where we take melodies and then we write chords to go along with them. For now, we're basically going to do the opposite. We're going to start with chords first and write melodies after. And this is an extremely common way. Probably the majority of music is written this way, harmony first, melody second. That doesn't mean the other way doesn't happen. It does happen a lot, but I would say the majority is probably chords first, especially in modern music. Maybe in classical music, or even in jazz sometimes, melody might be written first, but a lot of times harmony comes first as a jumping off point to create melodies from. So now here is the melody that I wrote, this new one that I wrote first with no harmony, and I've put the old chords, meaning the chords from these progressions, underneath these ones. So the point of this is to show you that you can see the chords are different. Some of them are the same if you compare between these two, but that the melody required a different harmonization. Because I wrote melody first, the chords ended up being different in this one, whereas here, all the chords, of course, and all the examples were the same because I started with them, and the melodies changed. So now, just for comparison's sake, I've taken the new melody and the old chords, and we'll see how they match up. They're in the same key still, of course. Not going to sound like it's terrible or anything, but you'll see what I mean. Sorry. So still quite pretty, but a few points like that. Let's take it back a sec. That's a pretty rough sounding note right there. Even though the melody is in the same key as the chords are, that doesn't mean they're all going to match up perfectly, which is why I ended up with a different set of chords here, writing melody first, whereas with the other ones I wrote chords first and the melody was generated from the chords, so to speak. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. Now lastly, we just have some genre considerations. The characteristics and vibe of various genres can greatly color the type of melody you write. The stuff we've been hearing just now that I wrote is very traditional in a certain sense, right? It's not like I'm writing hip-hop or I'm writing dubstep or I'm writing house music or metal or jazz or anything. I'm writing this kind of almost classical, almost film score-ish type of melody and type of harmony. And so the melody reflects that, right? It's appropriate to the style. Good melodies are beautiful and balanced within themselves while also being appropriate for the current context. It might be that these melodies, nice as they are, might not fit over a hip-hop track or over a metal track. Probably not, right? So those genres and every other genre will have its own considerations that play into the composition of the melody. And how to do that, that comes from listening, of course. You listen to the genre that you want to compose within, if you so desire to compose within a certain genre, and then those qualities will be within you from listening, and you'll know what sounds right and what sounds wrong. The point here being that these melodies I've shown are not examples of some top melodies that all genres should emulate. This is just the melodies that were appropriate in the moment to those chords that I had, and then vice versa, the chords to the melodies that I wrote on the second half. So now we have an exercise. Before we begin actually composing our own melodies, we will begin with listening. So the exercise will be, listen to a bunch of your favorite music and find 3 songs that you feel have great melodies. They can be any genre with discernible melodies, meaning certain genres don't particularly have melodies. A lot of really heavy metal stuff often doesn't have much of a melody. Ambient music often doesn't have much melody. So use your discernment in terms of what if the genre truly has clear melodies. But we want songs that have clear melodies. You want to find 3 from some of your favorite music. And then consider the main ideas that we have just covered, meaning contour and range and singability and things like this. Now here are 3 of my own favorites off the top of my head, but I mean I have literally countless. I could have made a list of 50 honestly within just a few minutes of thinking of them. Melody is one of my favorite things to look into, and so I have a huge mental list of melodies that I really aspire to and think are just gorgeous. So there is just the first 3 that came to mind. So that's it for the introduction to melody. Make sure you do that exercise now. Listen to some music. Find 3 songs that you love the melody to. I'll see you in the next one.